What you're about to see could reshape the entire political landscape of Canada forever. Mark Carney, the newly elected Prime Minister who promised to be different from Trudeau, just got hit with a political nuclear bomb that nobody saw coming. Danielle Smith, Alberta's fierce premier, didn't just congratulate him on his victory. She delivered a warning so explosive that it's sending shockwaves through Ottawa's corridors of power. We're talking about a direct challenge to federal authority, threats of hostile actions, and demands that could either make or break Canada's unity. This isn't just another political spat. This is the beginning of a constitutional crisis that could determine whether Canada survives as we know it, and Carney's reaction is absolutely stunning. Before we dive into this political earthquake that's shaking the foundation of Canadian Confederation, smash that subscribe button because this channel is your front row seat to the most explosive political developments in Canada. Hit the notification bell so you never miss breaking news that mainstream media won't tell you the full story about. And if this analysis opens your eyes to what's really happening behind closed doors in Canadian politics, show your support by hitting that like button and let me know in the comments what you think Carney should do next, because your voice matters in this national conversation that affects every single Canadian. The political shockwaves started the moment Mark Carney's Liberal victory was announced. While most Canadians were still processing the election results, Danielle Smith was already loading her political ammunition. This wasn't going to be business as usual, and Smith made that crystal clear from day one. Her statement wasn't just a congratulatory message, it was a declaration of war disguised as diplomacy. Smith's opening salvo was calculated and devastating. She congratulated Carney on his victory, but immediately followed it with a warning that would make any prime minister's blood run cold. She promised to protect Alberta against what she called future hostile acts from Ottawa. Think about that language for a moment, hostile acts. She's not talking about policy disagreements or political differences. She's essentially accusing the federal government of being an enemy of Alberta, and she's putting the new Prime Minister on notice that Alberta is ready to fight back. But here's where it gets absolutely fascinating from a political strategy standpoint. Smith didn't just throw down the gauntlet, she offered Carney a way out. She invited him to reset the relationship between Ottawa and Alberta, but she did it in a way that made it clear the terms would be Alberta's terms, not Ottawa's. This is political chess at the highest level, and Smith just put Carney in check on his very first day in office. The demands Smith laid out are nothing short of revolutionary in Canadian politics. She's calling for guaranteed access to tidewater for Alberta's energy resources, the repeal of the tanker ban in northern British Columbia, and changes to the equalization payment system that has been a cornerstone of Canadian federalism for decades. These aren't minor policy adjustments. These are fundamental changes to how Canada operates as a confederation. What makes this even more explosive is the timing. Carney campaigned on being more energy-friendly than Trudeau, positioning himself as someone who could bridge the gap between environmental concerns and economic realities. Smith is essentially calling his bluff, demanding that he prove his campaign promises weren't just empty political rhetoric designed to win votes. Carney's response reveals everything about his political strategy and his understanding of the political reality he's walking into. Instead of dismissing Smith's demands or getting defensive about federal authority, he agreed to meet with her. That meeting in Saskatoon wasn't just a courtesy call, it was a recognition that Smith holds cards that could make or break his premiership. The political dynamics at play here are absolutely crucial to understand. Alberta contributes massively to Canada's GDP and is responsible for the vast majority of the country's oil and gas production. When Smith talks about protecting Alberta from hostile federal acts, she's not just talking about abstract political principles. She's talking about the economic engine that keeps Canada running. This gives her enormous leverage, and she knows it. But here's where Carney's political instincts are being tested in real time. He can't appear weak by giving in to all of Smith's demands, but he also can't afford to alienate a province that's economically vital to Canada's prosperity. It's a political tightrope that would challenge even the most experienced politicians, and Carney is walking it just days into his premiership. The Indigenous dimension adds another layer of complexity that's absolutely explosive. First Nations. Groups are demanding that Carney rein in Smith's separation rhetoric, arguing that it violates their treaty rights. This puts Carney in an impossible position. He's being asked to choose between respecting provincial autonomy and protecting indigenous rights. It's a constitutional minefield that could blow up in his face regardless of which direction he moves. Smith's threat of separation talk isn't just political posturing, it's a calculated pressure tactic that's already having real effects. It's very fact that serious political analysts are discussing the possibility of Alberta leaving Canada shows how effectively Smith has shifted the conversation. She's not just demanding policy changes, she's questioning the fundamental legitimacy of Canadian federalism itself. The polling data reveals just how precarious Carney's position really is. Canadians are divided on how to respond to Smith's demands, with significant portions of the population sympathetic to Alberta's grievances. This isn't a fringe position, it's a mainstream political movement that's gaining momentum, and Carney ignores it at his political peril. What's particularly fascinating is how Smith has managed to frame this conflict. She's not positioning herself as anti-Canadian, she's positioning herself as pro-Alberta in a system that she claims is rigged against her province. This narrative resonates powerfully with Albertans who feel that their contributions to Canada are taken for granted while their interests are ignored by Ottawa. Carney's cabinet appointments have added fuel to this fire in ways that reveal his political blind spots. While he appointed Eleanor Olszewski from Edmonton to cabinet, this token representation doesn't address the fundamental power imbalances that Smith is highlighting. If anything, it reinforces the perception that Ottawa makes symbolic gestures, while ignoring substantive concerns. The economics of this conflict are staggering. Alberta accounts for 84% of Canada's crude oil production and 61% of natural gas production. When Smith talks about guaranteed access to tidewater, she's talking about unlocking hundreds of billions of dollars in economic value. The federal government's environmental policies, while well-intentioned, are seen in Alberta as direct attacks on the province's economic lifeblood. This is where Carney's background as a former Bank of Canada governor becomes both an asset and a liability. He understands the economic implications better than most politicians, but his technocratic approach might not be sufficient for the raw political combat that Smith is bringing to this fight. She's not interested in economic theories. She wants concrete policy changes that benefit Alberta immediately. The equalization payment system that Smith wants to change represents one of the most fundamental aspects of Canadian federalism. Alberta has been a net contributor to this system for decades, sending billions of dollars to other provinces while dealing with boom and bust cycles in the energy sector. Smith's demand for changes to the system strikes at the heart of how Canada redistributes wealth between provinces. Carney's challenge is that any significant changes to equalization would require constitutional amendments, which would need approval from multiple provinces. This creates a political process that could take years and might ultimately fail, giving Smith ammunition to argue that the federal system is incapable of addressing Alberta's legitimate concerns. The international implications of this conflict are enormous and largely underreported. Canada's reputation as a stable, unified country is crucial for its international relationships and economic partnerships. The spectacle of a provincial premier threatening separation and making demands that challenge federal authority sends concerning signals to international investors and allies. Smith's strategic timing is brilliant from a political perspective. She's confronting Carney when he's at his weakest, just elected but not yet established, with a cabinet that's still finding its feet and policies that are still being developed. This is when political pressure is most effective, and Smith is applying maximum pressure at exactly the right moment. The media narrative around this conflict has been fascinating to watch develop. Mainstream outlets are trying to present this as normal political negotiations, but the language Smith is using and the demands she's making go far beyond typical federal-provincial disputes. This is a fundamental challenge to Canadian Confederation, and the media's reluctance to frame it that way actually helps Smith's cause. Carney's meeting with Smith was described as positive and constructive, but these diplomatic pleasantries mask the reality that Smith extracted significant concessions just by getting the Prime Minister to sit down with her on her terms. The fact that Carney traveled to meet her, rather than demanding she come to Ottawa, sends a clear signal about the power dynamics at play. The broader Western alienation that Smith represents isn't limited to Alberta, Saskatchewan, and other Western provinces are watching this conflict closely, and Smith's success in extracting concessions from Ottawa could inspire similar demands from other provincial leaders. This could create a cascade effect that fundamentally reshapes Canadian federalism. What makes this situation so volatile is that both leaders have painted themselves into corners where backing down would be politically devastating. Smith has promised her constituents that she won't accept the status quo, while Carney has positioned himself as someone who can bridge divides and find solutions. The collision between these political imperatives could be explosive. The constitutional experts are watching this conflict with growing alarm because it's pushing against the fundamental assumptions of Canadian federalism. The idea that a provincial premier can effectively dictate terms to the federal government by threatening separation represents a complete inversion of traditional power relationships. Looking ahead, this conflict is likely to intensify rather than resolve. Smith has shown that confrontational tactics work in extracting federal attention and concessions, which creates incentives for even more aggressive demands. Carney's attempts to find middle ground might be seen as weakness, encouraging Smith to push even harder. The ultimate question is whether Canadian Confederation can survive this level of internal conflict. Smith is essentially arguing that the current system is so fundamentally unfair to Alberta that radical changes are necessary to prevent separation. If Carney can't deliver those changes, Smith has already laid the groundwork for even more extreme measures. This political earthquake we're witnessing isn't just about energy policy or equalization payments. It's about the future of Canada itself. Mark Carney thought he was elected to govern a unified country, but Danielle Smith is showing him that unity can't be taken for granted. The next few months will determine whether Carney can find a way to keep Canada together or whether Smith's demands will tear the country apart. The stakes couldn't be higher, and every Canadian should be paying attention to how this unfolds, because the outcome will determine what kind of country we're going to be living in for generations to come.